with centralized endpoint management, security, and governance. I'm Manjunatha Devadiga. I'm from Persistent Security Sales team. I lead the pre-sales for IT business unit. Along with me is Dr. Indrajit Singh Barara, who is the Chief Security Officer from Vara Technology. Before we start,
good morning, everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Indrajit, for joining us. So before we start, some housekeeping. We'll be putting everybody on mute. While we say so, you'll be having an option to put in your questions during the session. We'll be taking the QA at the end of the session, and we'll be recording the webinar, and this podcast will be made available in short term, and you can even download the deck for your references. So the agenda would be, I'll be running you through how we could solve typical endpoint management challenges that we see in addressing and neutralizing our threat, and what are the efficient ways to manage the ecosystem, and followed by Mr. Indrajit Singh, who will give us insights based on his vast experience on managing the endpoint strategies and the best practices across the industries. And in the end, we'll have QA. So we Persistent is a 30-year-old company. It's an Indian multinational with presence more than 17 countries. We are 10,000 plus employees. We serve around 350 plus clients annually. We did target $500 million last year. And while we did so, we also been recognized by some of the leading analyst firms, some of it like the Leader 2019 Enterprise Software Engineering by Zero Zones, and also ISG Star Excellence. We won 5 awards from ISG for the best in class CX. We also have a strong partner ecosystem to help us deliver our business. We play in most of the industry verticals, right from banking and finance, insurance, manufacturing, industrial, healthcare, life sciences, software enterprises. So we help digital business acceleration for organization and modernize their enterprise across geographic locations. Some of the service lines include security-driven data, business and intelligence, core IT modernization, application modernization, innovation and optimization for the entire ecosystem, digital business strategy and consulting, and security to the like of identity access and privacy management. So these are some of the service lines across the industry that we offer. Now, before we hit our core topic today, some of the facts that we see from the research groups, we'll have a little look at that and see how we could map this and help to solve these problems. The threat landscape for endpoints based on certain facts are around 1.5 attacks on endpoints with an internet connections per minute as per 2020 survey. So this is huge, and this is going to go beyond this number. Reason being, today every endpoint is exposed to internet, right? And 22% of organization doesn't even have the visibility that their endpoints has fallen into a non-compliant state. So you don't have any insight that there is a problem. There is a non-compliant state, right? 25% of organization was not able to meet the patch compliance in the desired window because most of the OEMs has a patch cycle of 1 month. And then if you're not able to complete your patch cycle fulfillment, you will be lagging that number of patches and overcoming more vulnerabilities. It takes more than 24 minutes for the new vulnerability to discover, so that your analysis and your insight to the vulnerabilities is too much of a time window for any kind of attacks. Now, why is this happening? Why is that the security team is not so effective in detecting these endpoint attacks? So there are fundamental layers which you need to secure. And then there are certain reasons which are foreseen by, once again, one of the industry research group, is that there are multiple tools. There are a lot of false alarms. There is a lot of complexity in managing these agents. There are lack of resource in terms of people and the tool exactly what it's supposed to do. There is hardly any predictive analysis on the foreseen attack that's going to happen on the endpoint infrastructure, right? And the dwell time that is taken to analyze these kind of things, the false positives that we see. So these are some of the very common known trends in that's where the security teams are not able to effectively detect the endpoint attacks. Now, let's see how we will try and neutralize this security threat and how we could help there. To achieve that, you need to face certain challenges. So what we have done here is we have taken some top 6 challenges from in managing the endpoint so that you can neutralize the threat that we can foresee. And let's see what are these top challenges and what are the possible solutions for these approaches to resolve these challenges. So one of the most and top of the list is patch compliance, because patches are the most important part of your vulnerability coverage, because once you patch, you take care of most of your security threats which addresses the vulnerabilities, right? So now when you look at the patch compliance, getting your entire infrastructure patched and getting onto a compliance state is the difficult task today. And the reason being, not all the infrastructure are connected to the intranet local network of your office. Most of the users are on the move. Today, in this situation, we are all connected via internet, right? There are a lot of dependencies. Lack of end-to-end patch compliance. Here, there are multi-platforms that we are seeing in terms of the footprint. So it's Windows, it's Linux, it's Mac, it's Ubuntu, it's Debian. So there are multiple flavors of operating systems in terms of the patch compliance, and every platform has to be patched to ensure the compliance on the patch. So now when you're looking at a patch compliance, to ensure your patch compliance across multiple platforms in a centralized way with a centralized policy where you can see a single window of compliance is a big challenge. The second challenge that we see is how well have you designed your provision to test and verify the patches with the exact blueprint of your applications that exist either on your endpoint footprint, and then you verify those, you approach that verification, and then you approve those verification and then get into the rollouts. So do you have those time window? Do you have this actual process in a precise way so that whatever you roll out has been through an exact test phase scenario of the exact footprint of what applications and operating system that end users are using, so that there are no surprises in terms of after you deploy the patches, how you need to look at the other reactions on the machines. Challenges that we see in distributed environment, right? Today, especially when you look at the Indian banks, some of the public sector organization in India, some of the huge enterprises, they are pretty much distributed complex terms, right? So there are organizations that we look at with central data center, with a DR setup, with 7,000 to 8,000 remote branches, zonal offices, and expanding to 60,000 to 1 lakh endpoints. So it becomes a very complex distributed environment to ensure that every single patch, which now ranges from 1.5 to 2 GB, reaches to every single endpoint at the remotest location, is one of the biggest challenge that we see because of the connectivity infrastructure, which varies anywhere from 6 Mbps to 512 kbps. But you need to ensure that every single endpoint needs to be patched compliance. So these are some of the very, very big challenges that we see while we talk to customers. Granular controls on what patches has to go, how do you acquire that, how do you filter those mechanisms, and dependencies. When you're distributing patches, the dependency of the remote distribution servers, for example, you have a zonal office, then you have the remote branch, and there are a lot of dependencies of these branches infrastructure to be there up and running, and these dependencies are defining whether the endpoints are patched or not. So how do you overcome these dependencies? Is there any smart way of looking at? These are one of the biggest challenges that we see. And and the time window itself, as I said you, this has been one of the biggest challenge that we see in terms of the time window, because you have not more than 15 to 20 days of time window to end completely complete your patch cycle. And if you have to look at your vulnerability compliance to a specific standard, you need to do much before that. Otherwise you'll be spilling over where you have a next release of the patch cycle for the next month and you're lagging for the patch compliance itself. So these are some of the very critical challenges that we see to address the patch compliance. Now, how do we overcome that? So there are some of the ground rules that you can look at. Uh, One, looking at a platform which can address all the platforms in terms of operating system flavors. That will really help you to centralize, to drive everything centrally through the policy driven and ensure automation and a quick time window for your patch acquisition, deployment, and compliance, right? So a fully automated, a cross-platform compliant, wherein it covers everything that your infrastructure needs in terms of operating system compatibility is taken care, so that the whole lot of your infrastructure from an end-to-end perspective is taken care with full automation, right from acquisition to deployment to compliance. So the policy driven controls becomes very easy to deploy because you are controlling everything through a single policy driven interface, right? So then you have multiple other mechanisms wherein you look at the discovery process. What exactly, how efficient is your patch discovery process, right? Is it deploying the patches which are relevant only? No, it is not pushing the whole bulk of data to your remote branches based on your operating system flavors, based on the scan mechanism that you have. Only the relevant data efficiently is transferred to your remote branches or the remote systems, and ensure that the relevant data is reached, and ensuring that the patches are deployed for the compliance take. Now, uh, to eliminate the remote infrastructure dependency, wherein if the remote distribution server is not there, right, I can still work with the intelligence that I have built within the endpoints itself. The endpoint itself has an interface wherein it can look up for data collection, data distribution to the local subnet. So you are eliminating that dependency of the distribution server, the existence of specific infrastructure dependencies on the remote branches, and making sure that your patch will continue to get deployed with only the thin interface of your endpoint infrastructure itself. You don't need anything else for you to run and depend on your patch compliance, right? So there are other interfaces wherein to ensure your patch compliance, does the patch compliance tool has certain interface for the end user. For example, you as an end user, you want to postpone the patch interface for next couple of hours so that it continues to do so unless it is taken care of that patch compliance and based on the user feed given back to that. For example, you want to postpone it for 2 hours, but then after you postpone it, you plug back and this continues the flow of patch desired state, so that whatever patch was pending for postpone is now applied and brought back to desired state. So the dependency of end user being connected at an intermittent state should not be a problem for you to achieve the patch compliance. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we see, because the rest of the building blocks are definitely important unless you take care of the vulnerabilities, which is majorly addressed through your patch compliance mechanisms. The next very important mechanism to mitigate the threat is your software compliance. Because as we look at patch compliance, ensuring that the right version of softwares are distributed, they are distributed rightly, they are governed in terms of distribution, becomes a very critical aspect of your governance and compliance. The reason is there are certain vulnerabilities in certain versions. And if that control is not there in an organization in managing that, what will happen is it will expose to a lot of those vulnerabilities and exposure to the threats. So here, what we look out is the distribution of software should happen through a controlled environment rather than looking at wherein the libraries are available on the shared drives, network drives. People can install things on their own, and you don't have any control on what's there on the end user software libraries, right? So this distributed software libraries is the biggest threat. So wherein you let people to install on their own, you have your own shares drives which are available, people connect to those shared drives and install things on their own. So that is a biggest deflector for your software compliance. So now, looking at the insight, so once this is there, the second problem is to look at where are we in terms of compliance. Do we have an insight to see, okay, I want to look at the deviations in terms of whitelisted versus blacklisted applications. I want to know which are the applications which are the deviations of my framework of whitelisted applications. I i want that Acrobat Reader should be of so and so version, my antivirus should be of so and so version. This is my whitelisted application list with the versioning that I have. Now I need to have an insight of what are those deviations, so that you need to take certain remediation actions against that. So that is the biggest challenge, to look at what my deviations with respect to my whitelisted software compliances. So there are certain desired states, right? For example, uh, antivirus, a DLP, an access control. These are some of the security fundamental elements which has to exist on the endpoint. How do you ensure that these are always installed up and running, right? So that is the desired application state for you as an enterprise, to make sure that somebody uninstalls it, it has to be reinstalled back. This application is not working, this has to be working state. If somebody has certain files deleted of this application, it has to be reinstalled back. So getting your critical application in a desired state, which is an automation process, you can't do it manually, right? The biggest challenge is you have different versions of antivirus. Some machines would not have that, some machine would not have DLP. How do you ensure that your core application desired status is maintained across your application infrastructure? So that's one of the very critical thing. And how do you reduce the service request on the application for this fulfillment? By automation. What has been your usage of application in terms of compliance? Once again, so certain license compliances, right? So those in terms of software licensing, so usage metering. See, these are some of the reclaim of unused license and some of the compliance status which will help you. So here, to overcome these challenges, you can look at a centralized approach where your libraries are centralized. There is no footprint of any application stack which is available in distributed share. Everything has to be installed is governed through policy based on roles and responsibility, is distributed centrally, right? And then this goes through a desired state automation. Once you enforce this as a policy, that this is the pre-sales team, these 5 applications has to be there, and you deploy that as a policy. If somebody uninstalls it, some application is not working, everything is taken care automatically by the tool to ensure that your application compliance is taken care. So while you do so, what will happen is your service requestment to service fulfillment cycle is reduced considerably in this aspect. And finally, you take care of the usage, licensing, the versioning, the whitelisting, the deviations. So all these factors together will ensure your software compliance to the fullest compliance state. Now, the third and one of the most important is audit inventory compliance, which will give you the insight of your entire inventory process, what you need to have, what you have, and the differential in terms of what's supposed not to be there or what to be there, right? So the lowest visibility is the biggest challenge. Do you have everything that you have discovered? If you are looking at single truth as Active Directory, the machines which are onboarded in the Active Directory are also being managed or not is the biggest question today. So you have onboarded a new user. There are 5 new users who have joined the organization. They have onboarded in Active Directory, and these machines are now being used by the user. Now, are they being managed securely through your endpoint management? Whatever new machines are added through the Active Directory, are they being managed also? Because once you only after you onboard them for endpoint management is where you are going to secure for the rest of the threats, right? From software compliance to patch compliance to the rest of the things, right? So this becomes the auto reconciliation is a very big challenge that needs to be addressed in terms of overcoming these challenges. It continuous discovery in reconciliation with Active Directory is one of the biggest thing that need to be addressed to take care of these challenges. And CMDB becomes the single source of truth in terms of service visualization and some of the service in terms of the business aspect, which also is a reflection of what you discover and what you publish it, right? So these are some of the key challenges and how you could address in terms of the inventory compliances. Now, apart from this, we looked at the patch compliance, the software compliance, the inventory compliance. There was, according to the research group, it also talked about some of the deviations which are possible, threats that you foresee in terms of symptoms, right? If there is a virus attack, if there is an attack on a machine in terms of ransomware or many other attack forms that you see, a Trojan or an application ransomware attack, there are certain symptoms that which are foreseen in terms of the operations, how these endpoints are behaving, right? They normally hijack your compute, CPU, memory, disk. There is a footprint change in the registry, certain services, right? So these, how do you proactively look at this in real time? For example, I want to see across my 6,000 endpoints, how many machines has more than 70% or an 80% CPU utilization in real time. I run a query and I get to know, because that becomes your operational compliance. If everything is fine, then mostly it is good to go. Or it could be to do with the registry entry, a port being exposed, the event viewer for specific user accounts, how many administrator access accounts has been created, because there could be an attack which creates multiple accounts. There could be an attack which creates and opens multiple ports which are vulnerable. So how do you verify these operations across your 5,000 6,000 endpoints spread across multiple locations? So these exceptions, insights of dynamic change and verifications and certain symptoms that you are aware of should be looked up. You should have a mechanism to see those. So that is how you could overcome a challenge in terms of looking at multiple metrics of your endpoint and seeing which are those and what are the deviations, which are those machines which are deviations, quarantine them, make certain remediation actions, then get back to the official network, right? And it's not always, because the attacks are so dynamic in nature, right? You should also have a mechanism to create your own custom things. It could be, I want to check these 3 things with that thing, right? And an interface to the WMI interface of your Windows desktop, which helps you to create your custom queries so that you can hook up to any query on an endpoint to verify that metric and help you to see if there are any deviations against that, right? So this becomes, in today's scenario, operational compliance, which is your operational behavior. It could be any metric of your endpoint. Can I have a mechanism to look and verify and see the deviations and take certain actions, becomes a critical component to understand and neutralize threat in your enterprise. So operational efficiency is one way or the other, which leads to the patch non-compliance or software non-compliance, is that how well you can build your entire endpoint management infrastructure in terms of redundancy. Does it have a redundancy capability at all levels, right from the core component to the distributed components to the agent component? Do you have redundancy in building the entire data? For example, you're transmitting 1.5 GB of data from your data center to a remotest location. Now the link which is available is 512 kbps. Now in a day, with the capacity that is available, you hardly have 15, 20% or 30% capacity for your patch transmission. Now, in between, if there is a link failure, you cannot restart your transmission. It should have checksum restart, data integrity checks, right? Data checksum restart. See, these are mechanisms which will help you to optimize your transmission so that whatever you have transferred, it will restart from that point, and whatever you already transferred, it is distributed within that subnet so that if that machine fails, the next machine will take over already has certain amount of data. So these redundancy checks are really helpful in bringing up your compliance level. Your secure communication. Today, when we talk about different types of connectivity infrastructure, not everybody connected to intranet. There are people who are connecting through the internet, other based of communications, right? Two-way SSL or a secure communication becomes an optical, a must for most of these communication mechanisms, right? So these are some of the operational efficiencies and how we could address that in terms of centralized management, being highly scalable, enabling secure communication. It could be a certificate based on the enterprise owned certificate. You have throttling mechanisms where you can define how much data I could use for my transfer of data, right? And you have mechanism to change that to either a static or a dynamic transmission mode so that you can optimally use the data that is data bandwidth that is available for your patch and software distribution. Inbuilt redundancy so that your entire infrastructure stands in at any cost so that your data distribution is continuous to ensure your patch and software compliance and other communications, right? So that becomes a very critical aspect. Now, apart from this, what we have commonly seen is that there are multiple other part of your security ecosystem. I will name a few in this, which are very, very common in terms of the challenges that you see. Is that your integrated data dashboard, because you'd like to take some of these non-compliant state to a unified dashboard for your references, and lack of integration with their ticketing system, because it becomes a very critical aspect for your workflow, service request, and service fulfillment. CMDB integration, which is a very critical piece wherein your asset feeds has to go there for service visualization. A lot of customers are looking for SIM log exceptions. For your non-compliant state has to get onto your SIM with a specific format, and further SIM takes it for log analysis and compilation. And most organizations now are maturing to your vulnerability compliance. It could be PCI, CIS compliance, or a NIST compliance. And you have a tool to run that, but integrating that with your typical endpoint management is a core requirement, because you need an automation where you see a certain deviation on a specific standard and that needs a specific patch. The entire automation of acquiring that patch and deploying that patch and bringing the entire thing to in a desired state becomes a critical aspect of these challenges in terms of integrating the ecosystem challenges. So that the tool that you're looking at should be able to look at most of these with out of the box integration, because these are some of the ecosystem components which are always seen with open APIs, web interfaces, and out of the box connectors for these vulnerability and compliance tool remediations. Now, the reference that we can look at here is the offering that we have from Persistent System, the Sentient, which addresses all these challenges that we said in the most automated way, wherein it's a zero-touch automation for your patch compliance, inventory compliance, software compliance, and operational efficiencies that we talked about, the integrations that we looked at. So we have ready connectors, ready interfaces, and all the use cases that we referred in terms of infrastructure challenges, redundancy build, the intelligence of smart agent to look at auto redundancy in the entire flow, data checksum restart, right? And data synchronization. With all these capabilities, we address the 360-degree approach in terms of ensuring the use cases that we referred in terms of addressing the threat for your endpoint framework. So some of the modules that we talked about in terms of Sentient, which takes care of your patch, inventory, OS management, which is once again in certain way looked at the compliance, wherein you want to look at the previous version, upgrade to a newer version, or on the fly or a bare metal upgrade, software compliances, usage management, and service. So I will take a minute on this. This is one of our recent customer use case that we see where we had a challenge of managing around 60,000 endpoints, which is distributed across 6,000 locations. And the customer said that, you need to manage everything centrally. I don't want any distribution servers in the remote locations. So we have implemented Smart Agent here. What happens is, along with the agent, the intelligence is built in the Smart Agent. So one of the machine in the subnet will take over as a leader based on the availability. If there are 15 machines in the subnet, and at that time there are 10 machines which are currently up and running, of that 10 machine, one of them will automatically be nominated as a leader, and then that leader will connect to the centralized location, get the data, and distribute that data to the local machine. So there is no dependency of a nominated distributed server. Based on whichever machine is available, he becomes the leader, he gets the data for the rest, and he'll distribute that. So while he's getting the data, we take care of all that checks that we talked about: data compliance, data checksum, distributing that data to his peers so that peer-to-peer distribution is taken care of, and ensuring that your data integrity is also managed. So there is no dependency of any infrastructure in the distributed fashion, so that we are complying to the patches for a huge infrastructure, which is very complex, based on the RBI guidelines in terms of compliance state, to ensure that 60,000 endpoints, which is now scaling up to 1 lakh endpoints, is being patched and into the guideline, and ensuring that security is taken care of. We as Persistent also have a huge BFSI offering, and we have a service team, and we have different service offering, right from digital banking solution, loan organization solution, origination solution. We have applications that and services that we have built for the forefront application and also the background application for the BFSI infrastructure. So we also deal with regulatory compliance enhancement, operations automations, digital banking. So these are some of the areas that we cover in the landscape of BFSI. You can come back to us with any of these requirements that you have. We also have 15 plus Fortune 500 custom in BFSI itself to address that area. So now I will hand over the bait to Dr. Indrajit Singh, who is our Chief Security Officer from Yara Technology. He will help us with his vast experience and insight on endpoint management strategies and the best practices that he has foreseen in practice across the industry verticals. Mr. Indrajit Singh.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Manjunath, and thanks, Persistent Systems. It's really wonderful to be here with you and, discussing on a very pertinent topic. And, of late, while the COVID was on, and we have seen so much of things which are happening right now. And to top it up, December, where we saw the solar winds, really hitting hard on the IT infrastructure and the networks all across US. And that's where we have been woken up, where the patch management has really become so very important, right? And while Manjunath was talking, just to give you one figure, that there are almost 70% of successful breaches that start at the endpoint itself. So endpoint management, endpoint, security has become very important. And also with the COVID, what has happened is that most of us are now working from home. So managing those endpoints is a bigger challenge for any organization, especially the large, medium, and everyone put across, because we never thought that this kind of situation could, come up. And to manage these kind of endpoints with these kind of capabilities, was never been planned that way. So your disaster recovery plans, your, incident response plans, and everything was put to stake when it came initially in the month of March, April, when we saw so much of impetus, when people were moving out, and we wanted to have the business continuity. And the business continuity from not only from the business perspective, your IT perspective, your cybersecurity perspective. So that's where we have been seeing so much of things coming up, so much of challenges with the IT teams, cybersecurity teams, security taking the forefront of most of the businesses to secure the businesses. And to top it all, the ransomware, which is, we have been hit by the ransomware off and on. And there's so much of ransomware which has been in right last year, and most companies ended up paying money. One of the major cases we saw Garmin GPS system paying almost $10 million. And when we say the ransomware hitting, the malware is hitting into your system, what is really the vulnerability that remains? So that is what we are very important, and what is the challenge here is your patching of the systems and the patching of the endpoints, and that's where the challenge came in. We all have been talking about the zero-day exploits hitting you without any notice, and really we are trying to so many solutions in the market to overcome the zero-day exploits. But what really happens when you are having a system with for 2 weeks, for 4 weeks, 60 days, at an average, also the OT system where minimum of patching systems 20 days from the day of release of the patch. Three facts for that matter, the patching of the system. So when it comes to unknown vulnerabilities, what it emerges is that if you're not patching the system for a number of days, maybe 40 to 60 days, you may end up with 90% of exploits would have already occurred, right? And of patch, and that's so very important today. We need to automate all the bottlenecks to identify the bottlenecks. How do we really patch, right? Because what is happening is when the systems are out of your network, out of your four walls of your data center, managing them has become a major challenge for the IT team itself, right? We need to shorten the test cycle of any patch which comes up. Not all patches are going to be really the best patches. It has to be tested. It may work, it may not work. The dependencies are really very complex situation, and there's always a requirement of the user participation for the critical applications when we are patching them, right? And the applications what are being used so frequently, we need to classify them as to when they need to be patched, how they need to be patched, what should be the frequency of patching, right? So that those are in a very secured manner, they are being safeguarded, right? And what it entails is that we are always going to be talking of the application control, because that's where our results really figure out, and the privilege management when we talk about the patch management. But what entails to us is when we are patching the system, we are practically reducing the attack surface, right? I'll be touching on the solar wind and how the things happen, but patch management really reduces the attack surface, because if any unpatched application which is there, maybe a BFSI, the banking system, a critical infrastructure, a small enterprise, medium enterprise with the critical data which is flowing out. So the attack surface which is given to the attacker, and that's where the challenge lies with us today as to how we need to reduce the attack surface. One way is to do the patch management and get over it. And second is to have the application control to block malwares and the untrusted payloads which are going to come. And like what is happening is today, the malware is not simple malware coming through a phishing mail. It may be a emotet or a trick bot which comes as a malware. Then it's got a payload, maybe a rook or a Revil ransomware which comes in as a payload, and payload to payload. It's a very complex situation what we are landing up today as to how the ransomwares are being downloaded onto your machines. So having a patch management, having application control, having the privilege management is very important, because anytime when a malware comes in, the first thing it does is to have a little movement, right? To take the control of your PowerShell, and then take control of your administrative accounts, and then take control of your systems. That's the three major point which you really need to overcome. And this all happening in the endpoint. Remember this: while you are having all your servers in place, all your IPS, IDS, UTMs, everything in place, Your weakest point is the human being who's operating your endpoint, and the endpoint becomes your main tool of attack for any of the attacks with the malware the hacker wants to do. Now, talk of the endpoint security part of it. Next slide, please. So, endpoint security point of view, we talk of a MITRE attack, and the MITRE attack framework is in discussion very often now. Any ransomware attack or any malware which is coming into your network, we really work on the MITRE framework, how it was being utilized, how the tactics, techniques, and the procedures listed out in the MITRE framework are being utilized to reconnaissance, weaponize, delivery of the malware, and thereafter the installation, command and control, and the action on the objective. Now you see this particular MITRE framework, TTPs. This is what happened in the solar wind, right? While you have the prevention in place, remember that anytime whenever malware comes into your network, it's not just a code or the file with a code which is there. It's a human being who's entering your network. So while we talk of the reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, and exploitation, that's the prevention stage, right? And till this time, it's like the file comes into you, the emitted virus, maybe in the case of the SolarWind, it was a .dll file. It came in, it delivered, it did the exploitation. Now look at the second part of it. That's the most complex, where it acts into the PowerShell, opens a gateway backwards, right? Maybe through the DNS channel itself, and opens the path to the command and control server, right? And brings in the hacker now, who's actually going to play the role in the complete game, right? So while the cyber attacks that manage to elude the prevention mechanism can go unnoticed for weeks and months, at an average, any malware which is there in a network may go up to 200 days plus. It may go undetected if you're not detecting that particular malware in the first 7 minutes of it hitting your network. So how do you really do that? Really, you need to have a mechanism as to it should not be able to hit your network. Detection and response tools are the best answer to the security challenge. And of course, the patch management, because that's what all the hackers are looking in for, your vulnerabilities, right? And the bigger the attack surface, the unpatched system, it's a big playground for them. And that's what all the hackers are doing. So endpoint detection and response, they complement the prevention part of it, the top part, which I've shown you. And it actually is helping the organizations to effectively respond to all phases of sophisticated attack. And that's what you're looking in for, right? And it gives you a visibility and insights, what's happening in your endpoints. And also it enables the security team to respond on the spot to the identified cyber threats. That's where the things are happening. So it's kind of the endpoint. It's very important for us as to how do we really have the endpoint. So the other aspect Manjunath also touched in, and it's important for us, whether you have a standalone, you have integrated endpoint protection or remediation, a big question. And the reply is very simple. Yeah, that the endpoint, if you have a standalone security solutions, that will not suffice anymore. You need to have a very integrated endpoint protection or remediation. The reasons are very simple, because you're able to solve key challenges with most of the endpoint EDR systems in the market today. And they also reduce the know-how and the resource requirements of and the challenges which come up. They help the security teams to stay focused to the real threats which are happening, and each threat is very unique. And like we all from the security industry know that there are no more signature-based attacks. They're all attacks which are based on anomalies. And Manjunath very pertinently told it that you really look in for the usage of your processors, you use a usage of your bandwidth, you use of your IP ports. That's how you really try to identify. And just to give you a case in point, the ransomware with the recent ransomwares, which are trying to attack the systems, the networks, they're using the DNS port, right? And they're making a DNS tunnel to exploit the data from the network. So how do you really, you know, uh, manage these kind of situations? So you really have to have a very strong endpoint solutions which are there. And they also provide a better ROI because if you're able to protect your network, right? Like I brought in that the weakest point in the complete network is the human being. If he's clicked something, if you're able to protect that particular file getting exploded in the network, that's the job what you have done. So you're able to protect the network, and it eliminates the risks of misintegration between the standalone solution. So that's really how we are working on altogether, right? And some of the best practices, there are a number of them. They are can be customized to all the industry, and especially the BFSI. There was an RBI guideline where they have emphasized on the endpoint security, which is very important. While they've been talking of the same deception technology and the endpoint security, so that's where it is important. Where you're looking for a system hardening, you're looking for a SIM, you're looking also now for a SOAR also, right? You also have automated patching software going for a multi-factor authentication. This is important, right? Of course, a strict VPN access policy, and what we have seen is that when we were, in the starting of the COVID, the VPN capacities were a bigger challenge because none of the industry or the company had planned for a VPN of that magnitude. So you should have the VPN, which is maybe a shared or the VPN otherwise, and have the access policies in place, right? And the cyber hygiene is very important factor, right, for the endpoint security. Without the cyber hygiene, without the user not aware of what's he to do it or what he's not supposed to do it, right? It will be a bigger challenge. Also, make sure that you have a proper application control in terms of your disk encryption where available, and also with the backup facilities which are there. So these are the kind of best practices which you need to follow, and the list can go on and on, but definitely I've tried to just concentrate towards the endpoint where you need to secure your endpoints from getting compromised. And some of the ways which you, as a security professionals, you'll be dealing with these situations, and the patch management, application control, software updation, privilege management. So those points which I was just touching upon. These are the 5 takeaways which I would say that these are the situations which you will face where it is going to be kind of a solution which is inventory authorized or unauthorized devices like BYOD devices or CYOD devices like we have been using most, and that is how we are today. You may have a situation where you have inventory authorized and unauthorized software. That's again a problem. So many devices which have come up. How are you going to manage them? You're going to also have a situation where you're going to have a secure configuration for hardware and software. You have to give them, right? You need to identify and have a continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation around the clock. You just can't have a VAPT test done once in a year or 6 months or a quarter. So you need to have a very continuous vulnerability assessment, and also have a controlled use of the administrative privileges, because the situation is a kind of a mix where you need to give administrative rights for them to work at the same time, not stopping everything in the system, so that you're saying that my system is secure but you're not able to work. So what these points really bring in to you, that if you have a proper patch management system, if you have an endpoint detection and response system, software updation systems, asset and inventory, what we've been discussing in the initial part, and one of the use case which Manjunath brought in, pertinent. This is the kind of things which we are going to be seeing it, and these 5 controls, are going to be effectively guarding you against or protecting you against 85% of the cyber attack, right? And these are the things which you need to really work on in your network and protect your network from any ransomware attack, right? So these are my thoughts from the industry perspective, which are kind of very important for you to take it on and work on them effectively. Yeah, Manjunath, please.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Indrajit. It was wonderful. So now you could see the link here on the drop note. You could register through this link, and we also have a complimentary endpoint protection workshop, which will be a very detailed workshop for people who will be running through this link, and will be shortlisting those candidates. And this will touch upon the top 10 industry trends for endpoint management, some insights and recommendations specific to your situation. It could be on the discussion, and certain gaps that for managing endpoint security and compliance that we see and that we have experience with our customers and our experience in the market. We could be discussing on those areas which could be very relevant for you. So this could be a 3-hour workshop. So based on how we could look at the things that are there and make sure that you can be participating in this link, and we will be enabling you for this 3-hour workshop. So now we'll be opening this for our QA. So let's see if there are any questions that are coming in. Okay, so there is one question about how do we ensure patch compliance for the machines which are off the network, right? So especially in today's scenario, if you look at there are multiple incidents in terms of customers who are connecting off the network through the internet, and this becomes a very critical aspect when you're looking at 100% patch as a compliance state, right? So there you can look at multiple options. One, the solution that you're looking at is able to cater to the internet facing users, so that either it could be intranet facing user or an internet facing user. It's a single policy adherence for your patch compliance. The same patches and libraries are used, the same policies are used, and ensure that this is enforced on both structure of your internet facing or intranet facing users. Second, the desired state automation. So it's not that compulsion that you as an end user are always connected to the network. For example, the patch policy runs at 10 o'clock in the morning. You might not be connected that day when the patch policy did run. So you might connect later, right? So there is a desired state verification. That means as a desired state, these are the 5 patches which are to be rolled out. And that verification happens whenever you connect, not only for the schedule that's been fixed. Also, when you as a user connect, whenever you are available, whenever you connected, that desired state verification will happen. And then based on that verification, right, there is a check that will happen. Okay, look, this is the machine. Now the patch desired state verification is done. And these are the 5 patches that needs to be pushed, and that activity happens. So it should not be a dependent factor that you are connected always. It could be anyways, anytime. That flexibility and that verification has to be in place. So this is a good question. I will put on this to Dr. Indrajit. How do we look at an integrated compliance and remediation platform, and how important is this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I think integrated compliance and remediation platforms are important from any company or a BFSI per se. And in the use case which you had brought it out, you spoke of smart agents, and thereafter, you're able to manage the complete inventory. You are able to manage the complete, assets which are there. And also, while we are talking of the managing the assets, the remediation part becomes very important, and that's where the EDR in the device is important to have. So all the EDR solutions which we generally talk about, they are looking to the remediation part, and that's where it protects the command and control channel to be opened by the hacker. So if you have an integrated system, you can see if any of your anomalies which are coming up in the network, and based on the anomalies, you are able to identify any attempt to hack your networks is taking place, and that's where you can stop it at the time of the initial incident response kind of thing. So this is important when we talk about integrated system. And while we talk of the SIM, we talk of the SOAR also, and the response part along with the EDR, it really is the best solution today available to stop these kind of attacks in the network happening now.
Okay, thank you. There is another question on how do we ensure the statutory compliance and the remediation, how far this can be automated. Dr. Indrajit, if you can address that in terms of PCI or NIST compliance and the
Yes, so
deviations that
that's right. Now now the primarily the time has come where the systems should have the PCI DSS compliance or ISO 27001 compliance, and rather than having an audit once or 6 months or whatever the frequency we have, we can have the systems which can give you online real-time audit of any of the device, whether it's complying to the ISO 27, because each organization has its got its security policy in place. Now, how do you really invoke, if I ask you a plain question as to how do you really invoke that security policy? It's only that you're giving it to the person to implement it. But we all know it that it doesn't get implemented like that. It's very difficult, and having an audit at a regular interval, physical audit is not possible. However, if you have an automated audit system, which gives you a real-time ISO 27001 compliance on a dashboard, and you can see the complete network, complete devices, whether they are following it or not. That's the way ahead, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of solutions coming up with those kind of compliance and audits in the real time.
Okay, thank you. One last question that we could take with the time that we have is, so one of the research groups stated that there is 1.5 attack for every machine that connects on the internet for a minute. So on that regard, there is this question about now enforcing that and foreseeing that the machines are connected to internet and there are challenges and issues that we see the cloud network connectivity and access, especially with the remote workforce that we are talking today. What is the best governance that we can look at and securing apart from the patches that we look at, Mr. Indrajit?
The best solution is the SASE or the zero trust network, right? The situation today has landed up that we are going to be, the workforces are going to be moving out of they're already out of the physical infrastructure, and they're going to be there for a long time now. How do you ensure the security of the networks, right? VPNs, like I brought it out, is a bigger challenge. And how do you control the applications? How do you control the processes? How do you control the devices coming onto your network? How do you give them a multi-factor authentication, encryption between the communication? So one of the best solutions, I think, the way ahead, what everybody's talking, we are trying to come up with a duo solutions is zero trust network, and that's the way ahead. And because one of the studies of Gartner, where they brought in a concept of kata, where it says that that your risk and the threats are not going to be the permanent one. They're going to be changing every time. They are going to be dynamic. So if risks and threats are going to be dynamic, how do you have a security which you have in place, which you decided, especially the UTMs and the firewalls, where you had control of the ports and all the traffic? You cannot protect the network with those kind of things. So the zero trust network is the way ahead. And there we also talk of, when we talk of the cloud security, we talk of the SASE, model of securing the networks.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Dr. Indrajit, for helping us and onboarded on this session. Thanks everyone who has been part of this session, and we look forward to take part in that survey and enroll for a detailed workshop from there on. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to be part of it. And thanks, Manjunath. Thanks, Persistent Systems. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.